The hospital hallways buzzed with the usual chaos: nurses rushing between patients, machines beeping, and the low hum of worried conversations. Among the overwhelmed staff was Emily, a dedicated nurse who had long learned to put others before herself. She had spent years in this hospital, tending to strangers with the same care she wished someone had given her mother when she had fallen sick. Life had never been easy for Emily. The long shifts, the endless exhaustion, and the meager paycheck barely kept her afloat, but she never let it show. She believed in kindness, even when the world seemed to have none left for her. That evening, as the rain poured against the hospital windows, a new patient arrived. Unconscious, injured, and with no identification. Emily was assigned to care for him, just another nameless face among the many who came and went. She worked through the night, adjusting his IV, checking his vitals, ensuring he was comfortable. Something about him felt different, though she couldn't quite explain why. He wasn't dressed like most patients she had seen before. His hands were calloused yet well-maintained, and there was an air of quiet authority even in his unconscious state. But Emily had no time for curiosity. Whoever he was, it didn't matter. He needed care, and that was her job. As the night stretched on, Emily sat beside him, whispering words of reassurance even though she didn't know if he could hear her. "You're safe now," she said softly, placing a damp cloth on his forehead. He stirred slightly, his fingers twitching before settling again. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on her, but she refused to leave his side. Some patients, she had learned, needed more than just medical attention. They needed to feel like someone cared. What she didn't know was that the man lying in that hospital bed wasn't just anyone. He was Alexander Carter, the CEO of the very hospital she worked in. A powerful, wealthy man who had built this place from the ground up, though few employees had ever seen him in person. He had spent years making decisions from behind a polished desk, far removed from the everyday struggles of those who worked under him. But fate had placed him here, in the hands of a woman who had no idea who he was. Morning light spilled into the room, and Emily barely noticed her shift had ended hours ago. Just as she was about to step out, a low, hoarse voice stopped her. "Who are you?" It was him. His eyes flickered open, searching hers with confusion and something else. Something unspoken. Emily turned, startled. She hadn't expected him to wake up, at least not so soon. She hesitated before answering, unaware that this moment, this simple conversation, would change everything. "Just a nurse," she said with a tired smile, unaware that the man before her was someone who could alter her life in ways she never imagined. Emily expected the usual response, a polite thank you or maybe just a nod before he drifted back into unconsciousness. But the man kept looking at her as if searching for something in her face, something he couldn't quite place. His eyes, sharp despite the exhaustion, studied her with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. She was used to patients waking up confused, but there was something different about him, something guarded. "You stayed," he said, his voice still rough from dehydration. Emily gave a small shrug. "It's my job." His lips parted slightly, as if he wanted to say more, but he seemed to think better of it. Instead, he exhaled and rested his head against the pillow, eyes still locked onto her. Emily felt an odd sense of unease, not from fear, but from the feeling that this moment was important. Like it meant something, though she couldn't explain why. "You don't know who I am, do you?" he asked after a beat of silence. Emily furrowed her brows. "Should I?" Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe even relief. He shook his head slightly and let out a quiet chuckle, though it was cut short by a sharp pain in his ribs. Emily instinctively stepped closer, checking his IV to make sure everything was in place. He winced but waved her off. "I'm fine," he muttered. She sighed, folding her arms. "You don't look fine. You were unconscious for hours, and you have a pretty bad injury. You need rest, not riddles. For a moment, his expression softened. He wasn't used to people speaking to him like this, not with indifference, not without fear or expectation. He had built his entire life surrounded by people who only saw his title, his power. But this woman, this tired but fiercely compassionate nurse, treated him like just another patient. And for the first time in years, he didn't mind. Before he could respond, the door swung open, and two men in suits rushed in. Their expressions were tense, their eyes scanning the room before landing on him. "Mr. Carter," one of them breathed, relief evident in his voice. "Thank God you're awake." Emily blinked in confusion, glancing between them. "Mr. Carter?" she repeated, the name unfamiliar yet suddenly carrying weight. Alexander sighed, rubbing his temple. "I was hoping for a little more time before this circus started," he muttered under his breath. Emily's stomach tightened as realization hit her. This wasn't just any patient. This was someone important, someone powerful. And if the nervous energy in the room was any sign, someone who carried more secrets than he let on. She took a step back, her mind racing. She had treated him like any other patient, but now, standing in front of the CEO of the hospital, she wasn't sure what that meant. All she knew was that something about this night had changed everything. And she had no idea what was coming next. Emily's heart pounded as the weight of the moment settled on her. She had spent the entire night caring for a man she thought was just another patient, only to realize he was the most powerful figure in the hospital. The air in the room had shifted. The two men in suits whispered urgently to Alexander, their words too low for her to hear. But she could see the tension in their faces, the way they kept glancing at her like she was an outsider in a place she didn't belong. Alexander exhaled sharply, raising a hand to silence them. "Can we not do this right now?" His voice carried authority, even in his weakened state. The men hesitated, but eventually nodded, stepping back. He turned his gaze back to Emily, his expression unreadable. "You look like you have questions." Emily swallowed hard. Of course, she had questions. Who was he, really? How did he end up injured and unconscious in his own hospital without anyone recognizing him? Why did he seem more frustrated by his own people than relieved to see them? But none of those were questions she could ask. Not yet. Instead, she forced a steady breath. "It doesn't change anything," she said finally. "You're still my patient. You still need rest." A slow, almost amused smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You really don't care, do you?" She frowned. "Care about what?" "That I run this place." Emily sighed, shaking her head. "You could be the mayor, a celebrity, or just some guy off the street. It wouldn't change the fact that you needed help. That's my job." For a moment, he just stared at her, as if trying to figure out if she was real. People always treated him differently, but she didn't. She was either fearless or just too tired to care. He wasn't sure which one intrigued him more. Before either of them could say another word, a sharp knock on the door interrupted them. A woman in a pristine white coat stepped in, her heels clicking against the tile floor. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly, her tone professional but firm. "We need to talk." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Later." She didn't move. "It's urgent." Emily could sense it. Something was off. This wasn't just about an injured CEO. Something bigger was happening, and somehow, she had just stepped right into the middle of it. Alexander's expression darkened as he met the woman's gaze. Emily didn't know who she was, but something about her presence sent a wave of tension through the room. The two men in suits stepped aside, their rigid postures confirming that whatever was happening wasn't just a routine hospital matter. The woman's eyes flickered to Emily, assessing her with the kind of look that made her feel like she didn't belong. "This is confidential," the woman said, her voice clipped. "She shouldn't be here." Emily clenched her fists. She had spent the entire night taking care of Alexander while no one else even knew he was there. And now she was being dismissed like she was nothing. But before she could say anything, Alexander shifted in his bed, his voice firm despite his exhaustion. "She stays." The woman hesitated, clearly displeased, but she nodded tightly. Then she turned back to Alexander. "We found out who was behind it." Emily's breath caught. Behind what? Alexander's fingers curled against the sheets. "And?" "There was an attempt to keep it quiet, but we intercepted the report. The accident wasn't random." The room seemed to freeze. Emily looked between them, her stomach twisting. Accident? She had assumed he had been in some kind of crash, maybe a mugging gone wrong. But this? Someone had done this on purpose? The woman lowered her voice. "It was internal." Alexander exhaled slowly, his jaw clenching. "Of course it was." Emily's head spun. Internal? Did that mean someone inside the hospital had tried to harm him? It made no sense. He was the CEO, the man who built this place. Why would someone want him gone? Alexander looked at Emily then, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't just pain or exhaustion. It was realization. He had trusted her before knowing who she was. She had been there when no one else had. And now, he understood something else. She had unknowingly walked into something dangerous. "You should go," he said quietly. But there was something in his voice that wasn't just concern. It was warning. Emily's pulse quickened. "What's going on?" The woman crossed her arms. "You don't need to know." But she already knew too much, and something told her that walking away wouldn't be as easy as they wanted her to believe. Emily could feel the shift in the air, thick with tension and unspoken danger. Alexander's warning echoed in her mind, but she wasn't the type to walk away without answers. Something about this situation didn't sit right. She had spent hours by his side, unaware that she had been caring for a man whose life was at risk. Not from an accident, but from something far more sinister. Alexander's eyes didn't leave hers. There was something in his gaze, an unspoken message that told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't just about him. If she stayed any longer, she would be pulled into whatever mess he was entangled in. But Emily had never been one to turn her back on someone in need, and she wasn't about to start now. The woman in the white coat took a step forward, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, security is being increased. We've taken precautions, but we need to move quickly. You'll be transferred to a secure location." Emily's stomach tightened. Secure location? Just how bad was this? She expected Alexander to argue, but instead, he leaned back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling as if piecing something together. Then, without looking at anyone, he spoke. "And the hospital?" The woman hesitated. "Whoever did this, they had access, resources. We can't be sure if they'll try again." Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. Someone inside the hospital had set him up, and that meant whoever it was could still be walking these halls. She had unknowingly been in the middle of it all, oblivious to the danger she had been standing next to all night. One of the suited men stepped forward. "We'll take care of it, sir." But Alexander's expression darkened. "No," he said firmly, his voice sharper now. "I'll handle it myself." Emily didn't know much about him, but she knew enough to see it. He wasn't just another powerful man giving orders. He was planning something dangerous. The woman exhaled, clearly unhappy. "Sir, with all due respect, you're still weak." "I don't care." His voice cut through the room like ice. Emily took a step closer. "You just woke up? You're still healing?" His gaze snapped to hers, and for the first time, his confidence wavered. "Emily," he said quietly, almost like a plea. "You need to leave, before it's too late." But Emily knew, deep in her gut, that it already was. Emily's heart pounded as Alexander's words settled in. Every instinct told her to leave, to walk away before she got caught in something too big to handle. But she had come this far. She had been the only one by his side when no one else even knew he was here. And now, with danger lurking within the very hospital she worked in, she couldn't just pretend none of this was happening. Alexander pushed himself up, ignoring the pain in his body. The woman in the white coat sighed in frustration. "You're being reckless," she said sharply. He turned to her, his voice low and unwavering. "And you think sitting here, waiting for them to try again, is a better plan?" Emily watched as the suited men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about what to do. But before anyone could speak, a loud commotion erupted in the hallway. Heavy footsteps, raised voices. The tension in the room snapped like a tight wire. One of the suited men moved toward the door, but before he could open it, it burst inward. A doctor rushed in, breathless, his face pale. "Sir," he gasped, looking directly at Alexander, "you need to see this." Alexander's eyes narrowed. Without hesitation, he swung his legs off the bed, wincing but determined. Emily instinctively moved forward, reaching for his arm. "You're not in any shape to—" "I don't have a choice," he interrupted. Against everyone's protests, he followed the doctor down the hall, Emily right beside him. They turned a corner and came to an abrupt stop. Several security guards stood outside an office. His office. The door was wide open, and inside, a man in a hospital uniform was being restrained. He was struggling, shouting, "I did what I had to. He doesn't deserve to run this place." Emily's stomach twisted as Alexander took a slow step forward. The man's eyes landed on him, filled with pure rage. "You ruined everything," he spat. Recognition flickered in Alexander's face. He let out a slow breath. "Dr. Hastings." Emily's breath caught. A senior doctor. Someone who had worked in this hospital for years. Someone no one would have suspected. Hastings let out a bitter laugh. "You think this place belongs to you? You think you can make all the rules?" He struggled harder, his voice rising. "You were never meant to survive that crash." Silence fell over the room. Emily felt cold all over. The attack hadn't been about power alone. It had been personal. Alexander met Hastings' gaze, his voice steady. "Looks like you underestimated me." But just as Emily thought it was over, Hastings' lips curled into a chilling smile. "Did I?" And then, before anyone could react, he reached into his pocket. Time seemed to slow as Hastings' hand moved toward his pocket. The guards reacted instantly, wrestling him to the ground before he could grab whatever he was reaching for. The room filled with the sound of shouts and struggle, but within seconds, it was over. One of the guards pulled a syringe from Hastings' pocket, holding it up for everyone to see. A cold chill ran down Emily's spine. He had been prepared to make a final move, even when all hope was lost. Alexander exhaled sharply, his face unreadable. "Get him out of here," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. The guards dragged Hastings away, his protests fading into the distance. Emily could still hear his bitter words echoing in her mind. "You were never meant to survive." This had never been about power struggles or simple office politics. It had been a personal vendetta, one that could have ended in tragedy if things had gone differently. She turned to Alexander, expecting relief in his expression, but there was none. He was staring at the empty doorway, lost in thought. For a man who had built an empire, it was clear that betrayal, especially from someone within his own walls, was not something he would forget easily. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He looked at her then, something shifting in his eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "I should be, but—" He let out a slow breath. "This place was supposed to be safe. I trusted the wrong people." Emily nodded, understanding more than she wished she did. Trust was a fragile thing. She had seen it break too many times in her own life. But then she thought about everything that had happened, how he had chosen to fight back instead of hiding, how he had insisted she stay when others wanted her gone, and most of all, how, in the middle of it all, he had cared enough to warn her away from danger. "You trusted the right ones too," she said gently. Alexander studied her for a moment before a small, tired smile appeared. "Maybe I did." The hospital slowly returned to normal, but things were never quite the same again. Security was tightened. Hastings faced justice, and Alexander, though still recovering, made sweeping changes to ensure nothing like this could happen again. As for Emily, she expected to fade back into the background like she always did. But one afternoon, as she was finishing her shift, a message arrived at the nurse's station. "Meet me in my office." No name, but she didn't need one. She knew exactly who it was. And as she made her way through the halls, she realized something. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something neither of them had seen coming.